Welcome to Be Well, a quarterly It's Okay podcast designed to promote and support mental, financial, physical, and social well-being. Be Well provides insights, tips, and strategies for enhancing all aspects of well-being through conversations with experts. Whether you want to manage stress, improve your financial health, boost your physical well-being, or enrich your social relationships, this podcast is a go-to resource.
Welcome to today's podcast. I'm Kate Fisher, and today we are talking about the messy, uncomfortable, and often unavoidable experience that we face nearly probably every day on some level, and that's conflict. And I'm joined today by Leanne Davey, who is also known as the Teamwork Doctor. Leanne is the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers on conflict management and is an all-around expert on reframing conflict into a positive experience, which is what we want to learn about today. So welcome, Leanne, I'm very happy to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here. Just to set the record straight, only 1 New York Times bestseller. I am the author of 2 books, but only one. Just to be fair, don't want to start with a lie.
Is a big that is a big accomplishment. So, but thanks for clarifying. But let me ask you, since I know we only have 30 minutes, Tim. There's a lot we could talk about with conflict that could go on for hours. So,
yeah,
I wanted to ask you. I was interested that your nickname is the Teamwork Doctor. How did that start? How did you earn that title, and sort of what drew you into really focusing on this particular issue?
Yeah. So my background, I have a PhD in organizational psychology. And so often I would get introduced as a psychologist and people would kind of recoil. And I started using the expression that I'm not a couch psychologist. So I'm not going to lie you down and tell you to tell me about your mother. I'm a water cooler psychologist. And an MC at an event just came up with, she's a teamwork doctor. So that's where it came from. And it's just a way of saying to folks, hopefully, that it's not so scary.
Your philosophy really focuses on the idea that conflict is actually necessary and it's very valuable to us. And why do so many people shy away from the idea of conflict?
Yeah. So let's start with the definition, because I think most of us don't have a shared definition. So conflict is the struggle between incompatible and opposing needs, wishes, and demands. And there is no day go by in an organization where there isn't some kind of a struggle between incompatible and opposing needs, wishes, and demands. We want to do all the projects. We want to help all the customers. We want to give everyone the promotion, whatever else it is. So that's conflict. And the reason it's so important is that those are some of the difficult, uncomfortable things we need to do to make trade-offs. So it's absolutely necessary in organizations. Now, if we go to your second question, which is and so then why do we run from it? Why do we hate it? Well, because for, thousands of years, humans have evolved where our greatest asset as animals is our ability to cooperate with one another. Unfortunately, there's lots about doing the opposite with people who we believe are a threat or who are our outgroup. So we have evolved that way. So we're biologically wired to kind of go along to get along with our group. That's reinforced when we're kids, when we hear things like, if you can't be nice, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And we run from conflict because of how we're wired and how we're socialized. We get into what I call conflict debt, which is there's a lot of things our organizations need us to deal with, whether they be trade-offs or team issues or trust or, how we're being treated. There's a lot of things we need to deal with, but we back away from them. We don't say anything. Maybe we're passive aggressive about it. And that conflict debt piles up of things that we need to be dealing with, but we aren't. And that's one of the biggest problems for organizations and for individuals as well.
And that's interesting too. So I want to come back to the idea of conflict debt, but one of the things that you said before is that conflict, what we often call conflict, is actually grievance. Yeah. And so that is interesting to me because I think maybe that's where the negativity comes in. How do you distinguish between the two, and what is, you know, truly what is grievance versus
Yeah.
conflict?
So these are my definitions and my observations of 25 years of studying team dynamics. Grievance for me is a static place that you sit. I'm sitting here stewing in my own anger and hostility. So people say to me, we have way too much conflict. I'm like, no, we don't. We have too much grievance. Grievance is like a place you sit. Conflict is active, it's motion, it's a process. So conflict is when you come together with someone else to work through the grievance. And we have very, very, very little of that. So in our society today, we have a lot of people sitting in grievance. They may be talking to other people who share that grievance. There's a lot of echo chambers of shared grievance going on right now. But there are very, very few forums where people talk with people who think differently to figure out what do we have in common? What one step could we take that would move us forward constructively? So lots of grievance, but
Yep.
very little conflict.
It's almost like the grievance becomes personal, right? So when I think about conflict at work, we're often trying to solve for something, but if I suddenly make it personal about me, it takes on a new level, a different dynamic. So to
And we
that
get stuck
end,
in it then, right?
yeah,
We
I
get
could
stuck in it.
see, yeah. So if you can take the personal connection out of it, this isn't personal about me, this is about the problem itself, then you come together to try to work through that conflict. Are there common patterns that you see as sort of the root cause of conflict or grievance within teams that is sort of universal?
Yeah. The first one, and probably the most prevalent one, is misalignment, that there's not strong leadership. There isn't clarity about the outcomes that you're driving toward, sometimes even the systems. So my SMART goals conflict with your SMART goals, or the way I'm rewarded or measured. My priorities are different than your priorities. So it becomes as though it's a zero-sum game then. Like if my things are getting done and if I'm winning, it means you're losing. So misalignment to me is the source of a tremendous amount of conflict. We're set up to be trying to deliver different things. We're solving for different things. We're prioritizing different things. And we aren't clear with one another about what we need or expect of one another. And so that's where there becomes a tremendous amount of friction. You're letting me down. You're getting in the way of me meeting my goals. That's probably the biggest, most systemic source.
Yeah.
Of course, the other huge one is we're humans and we have very different personalities and very different preferences, and we hold too tightly to those sorts of things. Who's the person in the meeting who is very extroverted and just talks off the cuff that's driving the introvert nuts because the stuff they're talking all the time, 70% of it makes no sense. But then who's the introvert who is very thoughtful, but then raises the really provocative, important point with 5 minutes left in the meeting? We're very negative in how we perceive and interpret and respond to people who are different than us. So I'd say that's the second big category. So category number one, we're not aligned. Number two, we get just entirely too invested in our own preferences and how we're treated. And we jump to conclusions about people not liking us or not respecting us or, not being good people or whatever else. Those two.
There's that personal part of it. Like, don't take it.
Yeah.
I will
Don't
say
take it
my
personally.
own experience. When I have let go of things, it's been learning to let go of taking things personally. Right.
Exactly.
So, I think that's been helpful. And I think, and we'll talk more about, about some practical tips and key takeaways at the end of the session. But I think now as a leader, what I'm taking away from this is that, for my team would be, set expectations and alignments early, check in to make sure that we're keeping with those expectations and alignment, and transparency, understanding people's preferences, having open discussions about those preferences, can help make things less personal and more about the work. at hand. So
Maybe a
that's,
third one to add to that list is another thing that's often unclear is who owns the decision.
yeah, right.
And that can be a huge problem because the other two things play in then. So if it's not clear who owns a decision, then we're just kind of tussling with each other and stumbling, hoping to find consensus at some point. So when we don't have a clear decision owner, that's a third source of some really unhealthy conflict. So it's probably another one worth mentioning. And probably a lot of
Yeah.
your listeners can think about many situations where, here's a decision we're working on right now. I have no clue who actually gets to make this decision.
It's interesting. And, this next question that I have sort of ties into all of this in the idea that, and maybe this is about conflict in general, not just specific to the conflict that we have at work, because what we're talking about now is very focused on, maybe the conflicts we have within our teams, but we experience conflict at home. We experience it at the store, maybe,
Everywhere.
it's everywhere, right? It's everywhere.
Yeah.
So how do we, and I think you've answered a little bit of this, and how do we take what feels like negative conflict
Yeah.
and turn it into something positive that can strengthen relationships? And I say this, I obviously let's not make it personal, but if I'm at home with my husband and we disagree
personal,
about what
baby.
color to paint the wall, right? I think we would welcome conflict as a tool,
Yeah.
maybe to get through things. So what are some tips and ideas to do that at the beginning of something that feels tightening and conflicting?
So this is a silly story, but people tell me it's very helpful. I talk about it as when the dragon is breathing fire, it's because they're protecting treasure. And so when you notice that something is turning into a fight, you can feel it in your body, right? My palms are starting to sweat, my heart's racing a little bit. I can notice I'm talking a little louder. The question becomes, okay, as that person's getting more emotional, more energized, what is this about? It's very easy to see that they're breathing fire. And sometimes we get distracted by the fire, understandably, because it feels hot. But the real question is, so what's the treasure in this situation, right? If you take the example of, your partner wants to paint the living room a different color than you do. It's not about the color, but what is it about? And there are so many different answers I can already imagine, right? You've made all the choices on all the other rooms in the house and treasure is just, I just want to feel like this is my house too. I just want to feel like I own one decision. You're picking some, screaming yellow color, and treasure is, what, work is really hectic and crazy, and I want my house to feel like a sanctuary and a spa, and I want it to feel calm. And so there is treasure behind every fire breathing dragon. So the way that you can think about it, the mistake we mostly make is we mostly respond to a fire breathing dragon by putting bricks of facts in a wall between us.
That's interesting.
Right. But this color is the Pantone of the year. But you agreed that you liked this picture that I showed you on this app. And we just start building this wall between us, which does nothing to calm the dragon, does nothing to say that I get that there's treasure involved for you here. And I respect that and I value that. And I want to protect your treasure as much as you do. So we have a lot of bad tendencies in that situation. The good tendency is to ask what I call open drawbridge questions. Because if you can get them to open the drawbridge and draw you a map to their treasure, then you'll know what this is about. So learning to ask questions like, what's this about for you? What's at stake here? How are you seeing this playing out? What would good look like? What needs to be true for you? What do I need to understand? By asking these kinds of questions and taking the time to show care for the other person's treasure, you've taken the high road. You're going to feel a lot better about yourself. But in doing those things, the trust in your relationship is going to go so much higher. and I can demonstrate that, when you build that trust that comes from, I get you've got treasure, you get I've got treasure. Can we come up with some
Mhm.
great solution that keeps all of our treasure safe? That is going to create a relationship between you where the next conflict probably isn't going to feel so much like conflict,
Yeah.
because it's going to feel more like problem solving. You're going to be able to start with trying to understand their treasure and share yours before you kind of get into this fire breathing dragon scenario. So that little story, just reminding people that when the person starts to get emotional, first of all, don't be distracted by the emotion. The emotion is not the important thing, right? It's not. It's just them
Yeah.
showing you something they care about feels under threat. In the workplace, sometimes that's my competence feels under threat. Lots of things that affect a customer relationship are very much treasure. I've been the one who's dealt with that vendor for 23 years. Like, that person is a friend of mine. Now you're encroaching on that vendor relationship, and like, is that person going to have the important conversations with you? Am I going to be shut out of those things? So there's so much treasure going on. It's the key issue. And in my book, The Good Fight, I say facts don't solve fights. All they do is put bricks in a wall between you.
One of the things that I'm hearing in all of this, which I think is probably a great reminder for all of us, is when you take a minute to think, to use understanding and empathy first. That doesn't mean you're going to give up your position, but I think that
No.
if you can understand where other people are coming from, which also leads me to the idea of sometimes in conflict we go too far, right? And now we've put ourselves in a situation where it feels toxic, it feels unhealthy. We've actually started the fight in some way. And we want to unwind, we want to repair the damage, but we don't know how without necessarily conceding our position. You know, how do you repair that? Is it the same thing as it going back and really, thinking about the dragon, right?
Yeah.
And using that same empathy, like how do you unwind sometimes when you get too far into a conflict that is damaging, a conflicting
So
situation?
I would stick with the dragon, and I might go back and be vulnerable and say, essentially what you're saying is, I was all about my treasure and I showed I didn't care about yours. So I would go back and say, I've been reflecting on our conversation yesterday, and it's really not sitting well with me. I did not show up how I wanted to show up. I was so focused. So may I please have a do-over and tell me, tell me what's at stake for you here. What would good look like? What what are your non-negotiables? Um,
Right.
so you're going back vulnerable, saying like, that's not how I wanted it to go, but you're owning. You're not saying that's not how I wanted it to go. I didn't walk away with enough understanding about what this is about for you. What's your treasure? So reflect on what I did, what I owned, and how that played out. Go back vulnerable and go back trying to be able to figure out what's their treasure. How do I make sure that comes out of my mouth so that they
Yeah.
know it's landed with me? And then on to the questions of, okay, where from here? That's when, because we'll break the emotional kind of tension with one action that we can take to move things forward.
What happens when you get stuck? So if let's say you, Leanne, you come to me and you tell me you're vulnerable and you lay it out there so we can work through this, but I just can't get over my grievance. And how do you move towards resolution?
So that's where we go back to the problem of not having a clear decision maker, because one person should own that decision.
Yeah.
And we often get stuck when it's not clear who does. Because in the case where there's a clear decision owner, so say it's my boss or your boss or one of our colleagues, then I go to them and I say, we've been working really hard. Kate and I are trying to find the best path forward here. As far as I understand it, the most important parts of a solution for Kate are X, Y, and Z, whereas for me, they're A, B, and C. we're kind of at an impasse here. I would love your help. What are we missing? How might you coach me? What advice might you give me around a way to come at this differently so that we can get to a resolution? So the first thing I'm trying to do is not ask the person to make the decision for me, but the first thing I'm trying to do is get some coaching and get some advice and get some help to see if maybe I'm stuck or I need to think about it differently. So I would do that. Then there is often a time when you say, so let's take this situation that you are the decision maker and I don't like what you're about to decide. But then I need to say, okay, here are the risks of making that decision that I see. But as long as you understand those, and like I've been on the record and saying what they are, I see that you're the decision maker. Go ahead and I will do my best to support that decision being successful. So that's if you're the decision maker. If I'm the decision maker and we've been in this, fight that's not resolving, at some point I will say, Kate, I've heard you that you believe X, Y, and Z is the important way to go, and you believe that for these reasons. Noted. I've taken those things into consideration. Here's where I've kind of adapted my plan because of that. I'm still going forward with my A,